Current news and prophecy awakening. This is the DK Foreman Weekly Report. And now, DK Foreman.
Now to the historic fires devastating Australia. Some 130 fires are burning right now, scorching more than 14 million acres of land. At least 25 people have been killed and more than 2,000 homes destroyed. Ginger is there in Bateman's Bay with the latest this morning. Good morning, Ginger.
Good morning, Michael. We've been driving around for 7 hours south of Sydney today. It was just endless landscape, just charred. And you can see there's also just hot spots everywhere, like the ones that I'm surrounded by. I also have a new accessory this morning, my mask. When I'm not talking to you, I'm wearing this thing because the air quality is horrible. And the smoke, look at this satellite image. The smoke from the Australia bushfires has now reached all the way to South America. This morning, as intense flames still scorch parts of Australia, at least 4 people are missing and at least 24 are dead. New South Wales police charging 24 people for allegedly setting some of these bushfires. An airline passenger spotting pyrocumulus clouds over the weekend, essentially fire-induced thunderstorms. Lightning from those storms starting new fires.
We believe what we saw is a column collapse that spread that fire dramatically in a number of different directions. So it's an incredibly difficult and dangerous season.
More than 14 million acres have burned, fueled in part by Australia's driest and hottest year on record. So when it rained Monday, people in Sydney cheered as the skies opened up. But fire officials say that the rain is actually hampering their ability to backburn. That's when firefighters set fires intentionally to control the progress of the main fire. Let's start with the backburning. It's so counterintuitive for people to say, I see rain, that has to be good.
It's definitely not enough to extinguish it, but it's just being a real pain in the fact that we can't actually light the fire in front of it. So it is a little bit of a problem at the moment.
One of the biggest factors in the epic fire season that still has at least 2 months to go? The drought, driven by something called the Indian Ocean Dipole, or IOD. It's a fluctuation of sea surface temperatures in the Indian Ocean. And in its positive phase, the westerly winds that would typically bring rain weaken, and sometimes easterly winds form. That takes all the warm water and rain-inducing storms away from Australia.
Many areas now haven't seen, good rains for almost 2 years.
Tens of thousands have been evacuated, but for some, escaping the inferno has not been easy.
We had 3 different attempts for air evac that failed because of too much smoke.
Megan Wegg and her family were forced to seek refuge in a movie theater while waiting for rescue.
There was actually ash falling from the vent.
A helicopter finally managing to get in and get the family out to safety.
You know how they say you never know what you got till it's gone? The air is definitely something I'm really appreciating right now, fresh air.
Can I show you something? Even when you see these hot spots, there's a threat after the fire goes through. That tree burning from the inside out, trees can easily fall. That's how people can get hurt. A lot of these fires were set intentionally, that back burning we talked about. They're trying, the firefighters, to get on top of it because by this weekend, the conditions get way worse, guys.
And can you give us a sense being there? I know this is your first time ever to be in Australia, not the reason why you wanted to be there, but we're glad that you are. Just give us a sense of what people are dealing with there, Ginger.
The loss, I mean, it's unimaginable. You think about losing everything that you have. Your neighbors also lose everything they have. They have a lot of help. They have a lot of heart here in Australia. I've learned that. Really great people. But they're feeling like this is only the middle. They're not even close to the end. They've got 2 months left in this fire season. So there's fear and hope combined, I'd say.
But they are hardy people. They really are. Okay, Ginger, thank you.
Doing a little koala rescue. She's a mother with a baby. And I'm cuddling. Just trying to collect as many live ones as we can. Doing a little koala rescue. She's a mother with a baby. And I'm cuddling. Just trying to collect as many live ones as we can. Doing a little koala rescue. She's a mother with a baby. And I'm cuddling. Just trying to collect as many live ones as we can.
We're very unsettled in the U.S. territory of Puerto Rico this evening. The island's under a state of emergency after a 6.4 magnitude earthquake struck this morning, leaving at least one person dead. Remember, they had another one yesterday. Thanks for staying with us for a full hour of local coverage. I'm Patrick Nolan.
And I'm Jane Monreal. There have been a number of quakes there in the last few weeks, but this morning's tremor likely to be the most damaging earthquake there in over a century. Fox 4's Sandra Rodriguez in Fort Myers talking to locals with loved ones on the island. Sandra.
Jane, Patrick, the people that I spoke with say the island-wide blackouts have made it difficult for them to contact their loved ones.
My heart is broken, not only this morning, but for the past month.
That's because Puerto Rico has experienced a series of earthquakes, the strongest of 6.4 magnitude, happening this morning. Today, Jose Candelario told me what it was like to be woken up by his house shaking. It was so strong, it was only a matter of seconds, but it felt like it was hours, Candelario tells me. He says after Monday's 5.8 magnitude earthquake, his family set a contingency plan, not expecting the strongest quake the island has felt in over 100 years was yet to come. We had that plan made, but once you're in that situation, you're in a state of shock. You're left asking yourself what you do, and when you try to walk, you can't because your body is off balance from the ground moving, Candelario said. The tremblers provoked a protective power outage across the island, causing many to not be able to reach their loved ones. One of those people is Marilyn Santiago. Two family members she was able to speak with were her cousin and 95-year-old aunt. They were both able to evacuate their apartment just as the building was beginning to collapse.
And as I was talking to him, there was another tremor, and it really broke my heart. I heard him. The tone of his voice was very desperate, and I hope I can forget that sound because it was very scary.
Santiago helped provide aid to Puerto Rico after Hurricane Maria and says she is preparing to do the same for those affected by these earthquakes. In Fort Myers, Sandra Rodriguez, Fox 4 in your corner.
In Puerto Rico at this hour following a devastating 6.4 earthquake. ABC's Victor Akendo is on the scene tonight.
Tonight, a state of emergency in Puerto Rico, the island reeling after the latest quake. The pre-dawn 6.4 magnitude tremor leveling businesses and homes, damaging schools. This church completely destroyed. The powerful earthquake killing 73-year-old Nelson Martinez.
That's when the wall
the wall. It looks like the wall collapsed on his bed.
Yeah.
His nephew finding him buried in the rubble.
The part that was here and here.
You tried to remove it?
Yeah.
But it was too heavy?
It's too heavy, but I remove it.
This hospital evacuated. Nurses tending to patients lying on beds outside. At one point, the entire island losing power. Tonight, hundreds of thousands in the dark. Today's earthquake, the latest in a series, including a 5.8 that hit yesterday, knocking homes off their foundations and crushing cars. The tremors caused by the shifting of tectonic plates. There are fears they could continue for weeks. Hundreds now in shelters, many in tents, afraid to go back inside.
Everything inside got destroyed.
Right now, there are 300,000 people without drinking water, and the governor doesn't know when power will be restored. With scenes like this, one EMS official says it is like they are reliving the aftermath of Hurricane Maria. David?
Just awful. All right, Victor, our thanks to you.
I begged them. I drove there. I wrote to them. I literally was hysterically crying, begging them to get my brother help. And in the end, I got, I'm sorry. I'm Eileen Echeverria. My brother was Robert Echeverria, the 9th NYPD officer to commit suicide. Yet another officer dies by suicide.
The second leading NYPD official had shot himself in as many days.
The department's 5th officer to die by suicide.
The 7th within the department since the beginning of June.
The department's 10th suicide this year.
Between 3 and 6 active duty NYPD officers have died by suicide every year for the last 3 years. But in 2019, that number doubled. The rash of suicides in the NYPD has tormented the department. Police officers around the country are now more likely to die by suicide than in the line of duty. But what causes the problem, and further, what to do about it, remains unanswered.
He always wanted to be a cop. He really loved that job in the beginning.
When did you first start to notice a difference in your brother?
In 2012, he was having a lot of issues. That was the first time I contacted IAB, and I noticed he was different.
IAB stands for the NYPD's Internal Affairs Bureau, with whom Eileen would go on to communicate with regularly as her brother's behavior got worse.
And then this year, in March, when he brought me his son to take care of, I saw my brother crying, and I was like, Bobby. He's like, I feel like I'm failing at life. And I said, Bobby, why? You're not failing at life. You have a difficult situation. You have a difficult job. It's okay. And then, sorry. And then things started to unravel. In June, I noticed my brother was completely gone. He called me, and he said to me, I'm going to kill myself. And I said, Bobby, no. I said, Bobby, please, just talk to me. Don't do this to our mother. Don't do it to me. And most of all, don't do it to children.
Eileen says she's reached out to IAB and told them everything about Bobby's struggles, his finances, his marriage. She put it all in an email.
Once they got the email, they call you within 10 minutes. IAB called me. We're raiding his house tonight. We're going to take all his guns. I go, thank you. I want you to get him help. Within days, I get a call from a lieutenant. I was at work. I remember crying. My coworkers were like, what's the matter? I said, they gave my brother his guns back. I go, how could they have done an evaluation that quickly? When I hung up with that lieutenant, I said to him, when my brother kills himself, I hope you're there, because the blood's on you.
Bobby Echeverria died on August 14th by self-inflicted gunshot wound to the head. He left 2 kids, a wife, a sister, and multiple communities, each with their own perspective on what a solution might be. I sat down with Inspector Wachter, the head of the NYPD's new mental health and wellness section.
One suicide is horrific for this department. It's a tragedy, and that's why we're trying to come up with new programs to kind of stem this tide.
The NYPD has implemented a series of reforms in the last several months, including establishing a new peer-to-peer counseling service. When you talk about some of the peer support programs within the NYPD, how are those different from the newly formed peer support program that is taking volunteers and is training NYPD officers right now?
This new peer to support program we're starting is similar to the neighborhood policing philosophy, where we're putting officers and civilians in each command, and they're going through a very extensive 3-day course where we're teaching them the warning signs of stress, depression, suicides.
Dina and Mike are both officers in the program. They're on the front lines of this new effort. Day to day, they work in separate units, but both just completed 3 days of training to become peer advocates.
After I graduated, there was a guy in my company who I went through the academy with who we lost to suicide. It just made me as a person want to get involved and do something, especially with the rash of suicides that unfortunately happened over the summer.
There is a lot of stress that a police officer goes through on a regular basis. And they should know that it's okay to talk about what they're feeling, what they're going through, and they don't have to go through it alone. The hardest part is going to be to fight the stigma. I just want the officers to understand that we're not looking to give out disciplinary action. This is solely to help them and to help them get better.
Richard Levinson is a psychologist who has worked with law enforcement for over 20 years. He says this stigma comes from a fear of having their badge, gun, and arguably their identity taken away.
In the old days, they referred to a police officer who had mental health issues as being a member of the rubber gun squad. They literally took their shield and their gun away from them, and they gave them a rubber gun in the early days. And that's the identity of any officer. I mean, if someone says to you, I'm a police officer, you say, well, prove it. First thing they do is take out their shields. The public acknowledges a shield as a symbol of authority.
Do you think that officers are more likely to seek that mental health help from a colleague, a peer, rather than outside help?
I think that the answer to that is yes, but I also think that they have to perceive that someone in their environment is approachable.
How do you reassure your colleagues that the help that they are getting is confidential, that they can speak, knowing that it's not going anywhere else?
I'm not going and telling anyone. I'm telling their partner. I'm not telling the executives, the sergeant. It's staying between us two.
Still, the peer support has yet to deliver answers on the why. And yet, more families than ever this year are left behind, still searching for answers.
I'm trying to work with them and say, listen, we need to do something. I had a meeting with the NYPD at one police plaza. I buried my brother 2 days before that, and they were downright nasty to me. When I called them out on how many people have reached out to me, how many letters I've gotten from wives, from officers still on the job that have begged me. I said to them, I will never betray you. I will never say your name, not your first name, not your last name, not your initials. That they need help. They need a lot of programs. A phone number, a peer advocate, not gonna work. They tell me it's working. Really? I buried my brother 2 days ago. How well is it working?
If you or someone you know is in crisis, please call the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline. That's 800-273-8255, or text HOME to 741-741, or visit speakingofsuicide.com/resources for additional help. You are not alone. Confidential help is available.
Amid heightened security at military bases and federal buildings, Homeland Security also warns of potentially disruptive and destructive Iranian cyber operations, targeting finance, energy, and telecom organizations. The U.S. says Iran has a history of cyber attacks.
We know Iran has used that sophisticated capability over the years to destroy organizations, tens of thousands of computers rendered inoperable.
From 2011 to 2012, hacking U.S. banks and locking out customers. 2013, accessing a dam's control systems in upstate New York. From 2013 to 17, targeting U.S. states, universities, the energy and labor departments, and the UN. The nation's energy companies regularly war game their response to a cyber attack that could shut off power to tens of millions. Pedro Pizarro runs power giant Edison International in California. The fact that you do have three distinct grids or separate systems in the United States actually, in this case, works to your advantage.
It does, because it suggests that if there is a major event across the U.S. grid in any one of those subsections, it would be very difficult for that to move on its own to affect the other side of the country.
Also vulnerable, banks, water systems, air traffic control, and corporations big and small. Tonight, Homeland Security is urging companies to back up their computers, disable non-critical internet portals, update security software, and look for signs that hackers are inside.
Tonight, doctors on alert.
as hospitals around the country report a dramatic increase of RSV, a respiratory virus especially serious in babies and older adults.
It's not just that we're seeing more RSV this year, but the cases that we're seeing are more severe and have more complications.
So this is Kira?
This is Kira.
And how old is she?
9-month-old Kira has been in New York's Maimonides Medical Center for more than 2 weeks.
Wow.
Yeah.
That has to be scary.
Yeah, it was pretty scary. People talk about the flu so much, but we didn't hear about RSV as much, and so now I know, it's like a big thing.
The symptoms are similar to a cold or flu: congestion, decreased appetite, and fever. But doctors say the key difference is that RSV patients have trouble breathing. There's also a risk of developing more severe infections like pneumonia.
There is a lot of complications that can happen. Children can even die from this disease.
The spike in this virus striking at the same time as flu season. The CDC estimates that more than 6 million people have already been sick with the flu. 27 children have died. The best advice for prevention: avoid large crowds, wash hands and kids' toys, and stay home when you're sick. Dr. John Torres, NBC News, New York.
We are still standing by to monitor Capitol Hill. In fact, actually, why don't we head there now? We've got on Capitol Hill, I believe, we've got the shot of Senator Mitch McConnell, who says he actually has the votes to start a Senate trial without deciding on having witnesses to attend. Let's listen to what he has to say.
We have the votes once the impeachment trial has begun to pass a resolution essentially the same, very similar to the 100-0 vote in the Clinton trial, which sets up, as you may recall, what could best be described as maybe a phase one, which would include, obviously, the arguments from the prosecution, arguments from the defense, and then a period of written questions, because remember, senators are not allowed to speak during the impeachment trial. So basically, written questions submitted to either the prosecution or the defense through the Chief Justice. At that point, during the Clinton trial, the issue of the appropriateness of calling witnesses was addressed. Obviously, that is the most contentious part of one of these proceedings, and that'll be addressed at that time and not before the trial begins. With regard to getting the papers, it is a rule of impeachment in the Senate that we must receive the papers. It continues to be my hope that the Speaker will send them on over. The House argued that this was an emergency. They needed to act quickly, that the President was such, apparently, from their point of view, such a danger to the country that they needed to really rush this through. And then they sat on the papers now for 3 weeks. I hope that'll end this week. I understand there's considerable discomfort among Senate Democrats, some of them expressing that to some of you, over the continued delay in sending it on over. I wanted to touch on a couple of other things. There was some discussion in the last few days related to the Iraq episode that we're experiencing now, about the appropriateness of targets. I want to associate myself with the Secretary of Defense and the Secretary of State with regard to the appropriateness of cultural sites being targeted. That is not appropriate. As many of you have already written, and I've been pretty open about it, courting the Secretary of State to run for the U.S. Senate. He's made a decision that I think clearly under the circumstances is best for the country to continue to serve in that role. I think clearly under these circumstances he made the right decision. That should not, however, lead to any excess observations on the part of the other side that Kansas, which hasn't elected a Democratic senator since 1932, will do it in 2020.
All right, we've been listening to Mitch McConnell there, talking about moving forward on the rules for a Senate trial. I want to bring in CBSN political contributor Molly Hooper, who joins me now from Washington. So, Molly, based on what we've heard from McConnell, what do you think this impeachment trial will look like when it comes to rules? What are you hearing?
Well, if the Senate is going to move forward with the rules based on the Clinton impeachment, essentially what will happen is both sides, the House managers, whoever they are, and the White House will each have 24 hours apiece to make their case. Now, that's not 24 hours straight, but 24 hours spread over a few days. I think it was 3 days in the past. And then after that, senators will have 16 hours, again, not consecutive, to submit written questions to either the White House or, to either the White House or the House managers through the Chief Justice Roberts, who will then read these questions to the defense and prosecution, ostensibly, for them to answer. After that period, there will be a time when the Senate can make motions, like the motion to dismiss or whatever motions they want. But before there's a vote on that, each side, meaning the White House and the House managers, will have 3 hours apiece to argue to add new witnesses, to introduce new witnesses to this case or new documents. So I could see something like the emails that just came out from justsecurity.org. The House managers arguing that they want to depose or to have John Bolton come up before the Senate. And essentially, before there's even a vote on that, the Senate goes back to those original motions, like, say, the motion to dismiss. And if those motions are accepted, then forget about the witnesses. But if the Senate decides to proceed with the impeachment trial, essentially, we will see votes on whether or not witnesses will be deposed. And that's really what they would be voting on, whether or not these witnesses would be deposed. Now, the next step comes in the deposition, and then coming back to the Senate, where the senators can then make a motion to hear from the witnesses directly. But there's a few steps before you even get to that witness, directly hearing from witnesses part.
So overall, Molly,
deep breath.
Deep breath. Overall, though, when you step back, people are all wondering, will John Bolton get that opportunity to testify in this? But correct me if I'm wrong, but what I'm hearing from you is there are a series of steps in place and things that have to happen well before we would even potentially hear directly from John Bolton.
Exactly. And even before the Senate even votes on whether or not to hear from those witnesses, the full Senate will take a vote on whether to dismiss the charges. And that's according to the Clinton rules, the Clinton impeachment procedures. But if in this, interim time between when Senate Republicans, essentially when 50 plus 1 senators agree to moving forward with this set of rules, if there is some change of heart per se, and maybe Democrats come on board and people start working together, maybe it changes up a little bit. But I really, given the current political climate, I just don't see that happening.
Speaking of political climate, I've got to ask you about, Senator McConnell noting that House Speaker Nancy Pelosi still hasn't turned over the articles of impeachment. Got to do that before the trial begins. Have you heard anything more, any rumblings on Capitol Hill about when Pelosi, what she might actually plan to do at this point?
Well, I mean, we've heard from people like key figures like Adam Schiff, the House Intelligence Committee chairman, who will probably be one of those House managers, saying that Nancy Pelosi is coming closer to making a decision as to when to send over the articles of impeachment. I have a feeling she might do it by the end of the week because neither side wants this to drag out too long. This runs up against the political schedule, as I'm sure has been mentioned earlier this morning, with Iowa coming up on February 3rd, the State of the Union on February 4th, and then, of course, all the primaries. Neither party, Republicans included, necessarily want to be sitting in the Senate, which is what the senators will have to do for essentially 6 days a week. And you have 5 Democratic senators who are currently vying for the Democratic presidential nomination. And that's a very valuable time that they will be spent planted firmly in their seats, submitting written questions. They're not the ones asking them, they're submitting them. So Nancy Pelosi, I have a feeling, is going to be moving those over sooner rather than later.
All right. And Molly Hooper coming to us from Washington. Molly, thank you very much for this update.
After those missile attacks, a passenger plane crashed in Iran, killing all 176 people on board. The Ukrainian jet, a Boeing 737, going down shortly after takeoff, and an investigation is underway. ABC's James Longman has the very latest. Good morning, James.
Yeah, good morning, Michael. It really is a catastrophic scene in Tehran this morning. More than 170 people dying in a plane crash there overnight. You can see lumps of the burning wreckage scattered by the Boeing 737 passenger jet. It had just left Iran, bound for Ukraine, possibly catching fire shortly after takeoff. There were no Americans on board, but among the 176 victims are at least 82 Iranians and 63 Canadians. Investigators are scouring fields of smouldering debris near the airport where it came down. They've retrieved a black box, but as yet they haven't announced a cause. Initially, the Ukrainian embassy in Iran blamed a mechanical failure, but their government retracted that statement, although they do now say they're not considering any pilot error. Flight radar shows the plane never made it above 8,000 feet, and it was delayed for almost an hour before leaving. Now, Ukrainian international airlines say the plane last had a maintenance check on Monday, and they've suspended all flights to Tehran indefinitely. There's now actually a growing list of airlines now avoiding Iranian and Iraqi airspace as a result. Now, all this happened, as you say, about 3.5 hours after Iran launched its missiles on those US bases in Iraq. And as yet, no one has established a connection. The Iranians have denied involvement, but they're refusing to hand over the black box to Boeing, which is, of course, a US company. One major scenario not yet ruled out: could this plane have been shot out of the sky accidentally? This is already an extraordinarily tense time in the Middle East, and it's now been made all the more complex.